Hello and welcome to Overcome a Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Travis White, and this is a place for you to share your mental health stories. I'm very excited to introduce tonight's guest. I'm speaking with Julio Rivera. Julio is a writer, martial arts coach, and mental health advocate. Julio, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Travis. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm very excited for our conversation. Without wasting any time, I'm just going to hand the microphone over to you and let you tell us about your story.
Sure. Well, it starts with me in my early childhood. I grew up in a really rough area in Brooklyn and was exposed to a lot of violence and crime and was the victim of violence. And it was just a very volatile place to grow up. Although I had some happy memories around the age of 8, I witnessed a murder that really traumatized me as a kid. And the murderer was actually the dad of my best friend at the time, and so it caused a lot of confusing feelings. And he ended up never doing time for the crime, and so I would see him every day while I was growing up in the building, and he knew that I was the one that called the ambulance, which means I was the one that got the police to come, which meant that he had sort of a grudge against me. And here I was, an 8-year-old kid, dealing with that every day. So it was a lot of anxiety and stress. And I never knew what was going to happen when I left to go to school or when I went to walk down the block. I didn't know if I was going to get rubbed at gunpoint, which did happen to me. There were fights constantly, and it was just tension all the time. I was always scared. So as I grew up, I decided to build a strong outer shell to defend myself. And I started working out and lifting weights and competing as a bodybuilder and being this tough guy on the outside. But internally, I was still terrified. And I just hoped that if I built this external, scary looking frame, that people would stay away from me. And it did work for a long time, but I still felt kind of terrified and I didn't know why. And I wanted to overcome that. So when I was done with bodybuilding, I threw myself into martial arts and studied as many martial arts as I could and earned 3 black belts. And after a couple of decades of that, I found that I was still carrying this fear inside of me. So I spent more time in therapy and meditation and kind of tried to get in touch with what the trauma was about. And really, in a lot of ways, kind of returned to that childhood so that I could process these feelings. It was only then that the fear started to alleviate a little bit. And I still deal with the challenges every day, but it's really different from the way it was before when I was just trying to solve it with the physical stuff.
That's crazy, like, that you had to witness that at such a young age and that you actually had to live with, like, knowing that person and that there's no time served. Like, that's to me, that's insane.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
no kid should ever, like, have to witness anything like that. And the perpetrator, did you personally know him, or was it just somebody, like,
Well, yeah,
random off the street?
no, I'd spend time in his home and, his son was my best friend and I knew him as long as I lived in that building. But he wasn't stable and he would pretend to be the security guard of the building and he'd sit outside and
Yeah,
kind of guard it, but he wasn't. He was just this, you know, mentally unstable guy who got back from Vietnam and was a little bit just it was kind of detached from reality a little bit, but he was supposed to be this kung fu master. That's the thing that really, as a kid, had me so confused because he was known as this master, but when something happened, he just pulled out a knife and plunged it into this guy. There was no kung fu involved. So I don't know if that has
uh-huh.
anything to do with why I became a martial arts instructor, but that's always something that stood out in my mind about him.
Yeah, yeah. And so, how long did it take you to, like, did you know right away, like, you were having, I'm guessing at 8 years old, you didn't understand, like, what you were going through was anxiety, like, and all these different emotions? Like, when did you connect the dots? Like, was it when you were older, or, like, tell us more about that type of.
Yeah, the anxiety early on would manifest itself into like stomach aches. I'd be at school and I'd suddenly feel ill and I felt all the symptoms of anxiety, but to me, because it just felt like a stomach ache and it made me it just made me feel sick, then I would tell the teacher I was sick, and they would call my dad, and my dad would come get me. And my dad was very frustrated because this would happen all the time. But it was really, I had this need to escape the school immediately. I felt terrified. I felt like I was being chased by someone. And that went on until I was about 12, and I started seeing a psychiatrist, and I started seeing my guidance counselor would give me therapy sessions. And that's when I started kind of getting in touch with the idea that maybe my past had something to do with the feelings I was having. But even then, like the bodybuilding kind of suppressed that. It kept me from getting too depressed, and it kept me from kind of sinking into these darker feelings for a while. It gave me an outlet that I didn't have before. So it helped me manage the feelings a lot, the physical stuff. But it wasn't until I got older and I went deeper into therapy and I did EMDR, which is a form of therapy. Wasn't until then that I really started to identify that little kid at that moment who was so terrified and what he must have experienced. Because until then, I hadn't really, I could think back to the moment, but I couldn't think of how I felt. I had disconnected the fear in that very moment. It's like I had gone somewhere else just to not experience it. So it wasn't until I was, I'm 40 years old that I kind of approached that little boy during an episode that I was having, and I comforted him, and I let him know that he was safe now. And in that moment, I got some closure for that traumatic event.
Yeah, I can only imagine like what that closure would feel like. This is crazy. Well, I want to kind of go more towards your martial arts background here. How has martial arts shaped your approach to mental health and resilience?
You know, um, the feeling that you get after a hard sparring session, it really feels like you've been cleansed. And there were many days that I would go into training feeling anxious and depressed when I first walked into the dojo. And then by the time training was done, I felt like a different person. And I felt like I could open up to my teammates about what was going on with me, and they felt the same way. So, um, we would have these mat therapy sessions where we would just open up and kind of spill our guts to each other. And I don't think that would have been possible if we hadn't exhausted each other physically and kind of beat each other up and made this gentleman's agreement as martial artists to test ourselves and push ourselves. And once we had broken through physically, we were ready emotionally to share. And for men, that's difficult to do. So within the community of martial arts, it gave us the opportunity to both you know, be men and do something that men do that's very primal, but at the same time expose the sensitive side of us. And I didn't expect that when I started martial arts, but that's what it turned into.
That's really cool. It's like you created that safe space for men was created to actually open up because, like you said, that doesn't happen and very often.
Hmm.
It's like I feel like as a society, we're taught like, oh, well, if you're a man and you're open about your mental health, then you're not tough. You don't have that. You're not masculine enough. Like,
Hmm.
and I'm always like, my thought is like, you know what? I've learned that like it's okay for me to shed a tear. It's okay to me openly talk about like what I'm going through.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, actually, my first sensei, my first teacher, he was a therapist and he had a therapy office in the dojo, in the back of the dojo. So he was someone that I was seeing for therapy for years while I was training on the mat. So I would get my physical training there, and I would also get my emotional and mental training done in the back office. So those two things kind of coincided. They commingled for me like really early on in martial arts and mental health.
Yeah. And now I want to shift kind of to your depression. Sorry, I have all these different ways that I can just want to different things I want to talk about. What did your darkest days look like?
Man, I remember the worst depression I've had in the last 10 years was Christmas probably 3 years ago. It lasted from Christmas Day for about 5 days. And I can only describe it as like a voyage through hell, as dramatic as that sounds. I was in bed in the dark. I also got physically ill at the time. So I was shaking and sweating as if I had a fever. I don't know if that's what triggered the depression or if it's vice versa, if the depression triggered
Mhm.
the illness, but I just lost all hope and I was in deep despair. And it had come like right after a hypomanic episode where I was feeling super high. So the crash was particularly hard. Whenever I'm feeling super good, that's one of the sad things about it, that I have to fear that fall is right around the corner. So that happened during that Christmas. So I spent about 5 days just feeling like I wanted to end it every day and physically in the dark, because I couldn't face anything. Yeah. And that wasn't even my
And
longest. That wasn't my longest depression. It's lasted months at a time, sometimes severe for months at a time.
yeah, I've dealt with that too, and I've definitely dealt with like the feeling of I just want to end it. I want things to be done, and it's hard in those moments because you have to somehow find it within you to pick out the good. Like this is what I do, anyways. I have to find it within me to pick out the good in life, in what I have, and say, you know what, like I have more to live for than to like die for. And it's like, and I got to the point where I had very bad suicidal thoughts and I knew how I was going to do it. I knew like I'd never had like a date or like a when, but it's just I knew how if it came to that. But good thing it just never got to that point. I was saved somehow before it got to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've gotten to the point. I've tried twice. I mean, they were I have to say they were half-hearted attempts because I didn't succeed. Um, Thankfully. The first time was probably 25 years ago, um, with pills, and the second time was in 2019. Uh, and that time I tied a one of my black belts around my neck and I hung it off the handle of a steel door and I just kind of leaned into it and allowed it to put me to sleep. And then as I was kind of about to pass out, the belt gave way from the door handle. And that was that. But I realized in that moment, hey, it would be really easy to do this, which was kind of comforting in a way because
Hmm.
I've been choked out many times in training. And I thought to myself, well, it's just like getting choked out. You just go to sleep and it's just you don't wake up again. But for me, it was always my daughter that would stop me, the thought of my daughter and leaving her. And that was the only thing that would keep me here with my feet on the ground.
Yeah, mine falls back to my family as well.
Yeah.
Like there's a time back when my 20s before I was married, and it was my fiance who I'm now married to now that always kept me going. But now it's like I have 3 kids, and like I
Mm,
can't imagine like it's just like I feel like yeah, it's like if something were to happen to me, I'm passing just her onto them.
mm.
So and after you know those attempts, like what kept you here? Or you said your daughter, but what helped you like start to rebuild?
For me, my depression it's just a cycle that has to kind of ride itself out. It's very difficult to pull myself out of it. The only thing I can do is just put one foot in front of the other and keep moving. As long as I don't get stagnant and just stop, I can eventually work my way out of it. But I don't think it's something in particular that I do. I think it's just forward movement, even when you don't want to do it. Because that's the thing with depression. You don't want to really do anything. At least I don't. But I just kind of go on automatic and do it like a robot. And then eventually the feelings subside.
I could relate to you. Like that's
Yeah.
me too. You said like you pretty much stole the words out of my mouth. Like it's I don't want to do it, but eventually I just have to work my way out of it. And I remember talking to my therapist about this once, and I said, there's days where I feel like I'm taking 2 steps forward and then 5 steps back. And he's like, well, don't focus on those 5 steps. Like, you're still taking 2 steps forward, and eventually it's going to be 3, then 4. He's like, you just continue to take those baby steps. Don't count the backward steps.
Yeah, it's and it can be anything that that's that forward motion for you. It can be the smallest thing, you know. For some people it's just being able to get out of bed, and for some, be able to take a shower and, go to work or see your kid or
Yeah.
whatever it might be, Um, whatever small step you can take is better than just sitting there in your depression.
Yes, that is for sure. And sometimes it's like, for me, it's just like going out in the sunlight and getting that breath of fresh air and then
Mm,
coming back into the house into the dark. And it's like, well, at least I got the breath of fresh air.
yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
And what, so I'm skipping around again. I'm sorry. I'm all over the place, but I keep thinking of different things. So, what parallels do you see between physical combat and the internal battles that we all face?
I think they're both resistance, especially in jujitsu, we're dealing with using the energy that's given to us to our advantage, the energy that's supposed to be being used against us. We use it as our ally. And it's the same internally. I mean, we have this resistance to what is all the time, the resistance to our feelings in that moment, the resistance to what's going on around us. But all we can do is use that motion to get where we want. We can't deny that things are going on. If I'm facing an opponent, I can't deny that my opponent is there, but I have to use their actions to my advantage. So when life pushes you in one direction, you have to somehow find a positive in that and see where you're being guided by that, by life. And in the same way, our opponents guide us to where victory is. They may be trying to beat us, but if we use our skill and our cunning, then we're going to use their strategy against them. We're going to use their power against them. And depression is incredibly powerful, and anxiety is incredibly powerful. But it's just like before you have a fight or you're in a tournament and you feel incredible fear and you feel this anxiety, but it's really just excitement, right? And it's how we're labeling it in that moment. So the fear of fighting and that anxiety that you get before a fight, um, relabeling it is really important. So if we can learn to relabel anxiety before a fight, then we can learn to relabel anxiety when we're just sort of having a moment or we're having a flashback because of PTSD or whatever it may be. Then we can take some control of that feeling and start to call it something else.
Very well said. I love it. Now, I'm going to shift topics here again. I want to dive also into your writing. I'm curious to know how, like, writing has, uh, how we think of how to phrase this. How has writing impacted your healing journey?
I started writing at the same year that I started therapy and I started bodybuilding, all lifting weights when I was 12. So all those things happened during the same year. And I feel like it was just a time that I needed to express myself in as many ways as possible. So I started writing poetry when I was 12 and it was all kind of very dark and sad. And then when I was 13, I won an award for writing an essay on the Holocaust, and my teacher told me that I was talented. And from then on, I would write my feelings down, and I would write poetry, and I majored in journalism and at NYU. So I didn't really want to work for newspapers or anything, but I started writing for magazines after college. I felt like the expression was something that I needed. I needed something that was non-physical. I needed a way to express myself that didn't have to do with my body or with my physical ability. And then as time went on, I realized that even in writing fiction, I could put lots of my personality into it and I could send a message with what I was writing, whatever it was, whether it was a screenplay or whether it was an essay, I could still speak my mind in there somehow through the themes and stuff. So um, it was uh, it was a natural kind of progression for me to express myself um, outside of the physical. And I felt like I could be as open as possible in my writing, and I could write just for me, or I could write for other people, or I could get as personal as I wanted to, and not have any fear. And it was one of the few places that I could live without fear.
I love that. I love hearing stories of when people find something that like helps just transform them, and that it's like I don't even know how to explain it. It's just really cool to hear these stories. So,
Mm, yeah,
and you have remind me, you have 2 books out. Is it two?
yeah. I
And
have
then
two
some
books
essays,
out.
correct?
Hmm. I have two books out. Tons of essays on Medium. The first book, it's called Broke Down Sensei. It's about how I dealt with trauma and bipolar disorder, how I fought it kind of from the outside in, trying to build a strong foundation at first. It wasn't intended to become like the memoir that it did, but I was off my medication at the time and I was cycling really rapidly between depression and hypomania. So I was writing differently every day depending on my mood. So it really turned into this kind of roller coaster ride. And one day I'm talking like I'm the second coming, and the next day I'm feeling like a pauper. So it was a trip, and at the end I felt like it was even more raw than I wanted it to be, but I still wanted to put it out. And I did, and it got a little bit of backlash from some people in my life. And I actually did go in and re-edit it after someone kind of expressed to me that they were hurt by some things. But I didn't take anything out that I felt like compromised my vision at all. So that was important to me. And then the second
So,
book, yeah,
no, you go ahead. You finish your thought.
the second book was what the first book was intended to be. It was a study of jujitsu as a metaphor for life and martial arts in general, and how to help deal with the issues with mental health and depression and anxiety using the principles in jiu-jitsu and dealing with resistance. So yeah, I'm really proud of both of them. The second one was, like I said, it was what my vision was all along, and I was medicated and in therapy and everything when I wrote it. So I had a certain amount of clarity that I didn't have when I wrote the first book.
Yeah. So this question uh, might be more geared towards uh, towards broke down sensei. Do you feel like it was more in the end, like after writing it, do you feel like it was more therapy or more like exposure?
It was definitely therapeutic. It was, the first draft I wrote by hand, and I wrote it purposely in a handwriting that I couldn't read. It was just scribble. So I wrote the whole draft that way because I didn't want to go back and read it and make corrections of that. I just wanted it to be emotion, like raw emotion on the page. And then when I was done with that draft, that's when I started typing and reading my drafts over and stuff like that. So it was that first draft was all just feeling and letting it out.
I actually think that's really cool that you did it all by hand. It's
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like a lot of work, but that's still really cool that you did it all by hand.
Yeah, it was like I was moving feverishly, you know what I mean? Because I had so
Mhm.
much to say and I had so much kind of pent up in me. And it was right after my divorce, so I had, lots of feelings going on about my divorce and about my ex-wife and you know, and some of it there was some vitriol in there that I had to get out in that first draft. And even the second and third draft. I mean, it wasn't until maybe the fifth draft that I had kind of calmed down and I stopped being so angry and I, started to examine things a little more clear-headed.
Yeah, and I want to go to your kind of skip to your bipolar diagnosis. What misconceptions about bipolar disorder do you wish people better understood?
I think that people just generally dismiss mental health disorders under that label of crazy because they just have a tremendous fear of it. People are afraid of having to deal with mental health issues themselves, of losing touch with reality. I think I don't think people understand the severity of it either. I think it can be kind of thrown around a lot, oh, he's manic depressive or he's bipolar or but it's bad. Like when it's it's no joke, and I think people don't want to talk about it, but at the same time they don't understand how damaging it can be to your life, how much it can just throw everything, make everything go haywire in your life. And I don't think there's enough empathy for people that are dealing with issues. I think there's a fear that if you talk about it, then you're opening up the possibility that you could have to deal with it yourself. And people are terrified of that. And I think the biggest misconception and the thing that always bothered me as a kid was that people think you're choosing to be depressed when you're depressed. People think that it's a conscious choice and you could just snap out of it at any moment. And, you know, God, if that were the case, God knows I wouldn't have gone through all those days of depression.
Right? Like, it's like, you really think I would choose this? It's there's no way, like, I would choose to just sit in a room or a bed and be depressed and have a hard time waking up and not wanting to go to work and, uh, like, faking a smile just because that's what I have to do to get through the day. Like, yeah, I agree with everything that you just said there. And it's like, especially, these I think of it this way, it's like everybody's had a bad hair day, but until you've been through like some of these deep spouts of depression, anxiety, whatever it is that you're, whatever mental health or struggle you're dealing with, like until you're actually dealing with it day in and day out, like a bad hair day doesn't even compare
Mm,
to like having to deal with any of that stuff.
hmm. Yeah. I'm always amazed when I meet people that haven't dealt with severe depression and haven't dealt with severe anxiety and people that can't relate to it. To me, it's because it's just been a lifetime of dealing with this
Hmm.
stuff and you don't know what life would be without it.
Yeah, and my more severe like depression, anxiety came out in my 20s after I had some medical issues. And I remember when I first started realizing that I'm an anxious person and I get really bad anxiety. Back at the time, I wasn't married yet, and my wife or then fiance was like, she didn't know how to deal with it. Like, she didn't know how to help me, and she would try, and she would say, like, I don't understand where you're coming from. Like, I don't know why you're acting this way. But the now years later, she's dealt with like some anxiety issues herself in the past year, and she looked at me, I think it was like 6 months ago, and said, I finally understand where you're coming from and why
Mm,
you did the things you did. And I
wow.
said, it's I said, that's crazy. I said, I never thought I would see the day that you would be an anxious person,
Yeah.
because that's always been my job. I said, your job was just to be my caretaker,
Yeah.
but I said, I am glad that you finally like have been able to. I said, not that I'm happy that you had to go through that. That's not what I'm saying, but it's a good feeling to know that you've walked in my shoes a little bit, just so you can have that clear picture and understanding of what it's like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that I'd wish it up on anybody, because I don't.
Hmm. Yeah. That's one of the great things about my relationship with my ex-wife actually is that she's very understanding about my situation. Same with me and her and whatever her issues might be. So we can, even though we're divorced, we can still lean on each other and kind of understand each other. And, she's somebody I reach out to when I'm having difficult times. So she's a social worker as well. So having somebody that kind of understands mental health and mental health issues uh, is just a huge, huge help.
Yeah, and I think that we all need at least one person in our corner that understands, like, somewhere, the mental health a little bit just to, I mean, even just be there to listen to you.
Hmm.
So you've become this mental health advocate. How do you balance being vulnerable and protecting your own mental health while advocating for mental health?
I'm not afraid to talk about my darkest days or, the times that I feel weakest, um, because I'm, secure in certain I'm secure in my masculinity just because of the things that I've done and who I feel like I am as a person. So I don't have fear of appearing weak when I talk about my vulnerability. Um, and I think it's super important for people, for men in particular, who have a strong facade to talk about this stuff because particularly with young kids, with young men, there's uh, there's a choice that has to be made between being sensitive and being tough, and that's a false choice. And for me, if I don't sort of discard that line and not try to protect my masculinity, if I don't do that, then I'm not really helping all the people that I can. So, um, I don't feel like I have to defend whether or not I'm a real man just because I'm talking about my vulnerability.
Yeah, and I actually really admire that about you because I love that you're vulnerable and open to discussing it because I think we need more men like this to be able to be vulnerable and but sometimes though I guess you can't really we have this problem in society where people are going through these struggles but they don't know, maybe they don't know or they're not admitting that they have these struggles. And I think before we can actually be vulnerable and open up and talk about them, we have to admit to ourselves that, like, what, I'm struggling. I'm going through this. I'm not just going through the motions anymore. I have to, I'm depressed or I'm anxious or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too often it's just discounted as just the way things are supposed to be. I'm supposed to be feeling terrible all the time. We kind of we become used to it, and we, let those feelings become who we are, when our life could be so much better if we addressed what we were feeling.
I totally, totally agree with you. So, what do you think we need to change, like maybe socially or systemically, to better support like people in crisis?
I think there have to be tons more resources poured into mental health hotlines and hospitals and good treatment programs and um, group therapy sessions. It's incredibly hard to find good groups to become a part of when you're dealing with mental health issues. I've tried in the past, and it's not very easy. So I think there have to be more resources for people where they don't have to jump through hoops to get help because it's hard enough to say that you need help with your mental health. It's a very scary thing to admit. So the more difficult you make it for people to get help, the more likely it is that they're just not going to do it. And we see from the homelessness crisis that it's an epidemic, mental health issues, mental illness, and the situation with the homeless and with crime, and it's only going to get worse as mental health issues aren't addressed. That's the key to everything. So just more resources for sure.
Yeah, it's just pretty seeing this like crisis, this mental health crisis, and it's going on like with the homelessness and everything. Like it's pretty crazy because it's gotten way worse in the last 5 years, 6 years. I
Hmm.
mean, like it could probably go beyond that, but it's
Yeah,
kind of where.
yeah, and a lot of it I think coincides with cost of living and how difficult it is to keep a roof over your head for people, especially for people who have issues with their stability as it is. There have to be a lot of them can't live on their own without supervision of some
Mhm.
sort. So if those programs don't have the funding that they need, then they're just going to be out on the street. there's no other option for them, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm curious though, like when did you first feel that your story could help someone else? Like when did that come
I
into play?
When I first got diagnosed, I immediately was open about it, and I had my own jiu-jitsu academy at the time, so I wanted to use that as a platform. So I would share on my social media that, if anyone needed help or if anyone, wanted to talk, and, that I understood what the depression was like and what anxiety was like. And I had people reach out when I did share my story and say that it really helped them, um and that it made a difference. And that's when I remember telling my ex-wife, I realize now why what I'm here to do. I realize now that I'm here to help other people that have gone through what I've gone through. And, I don't wish it on my worst enemy. And if I can help, one person, then that's huge for me. So I decided to focus my energy on that. And, even whether it was at my school or on social media or at a workshop or seminar or whatever, my main concern was to um, delve into why people were training, what kind of trauma they were dealing with, and how their training could help them become more whole. And I got a lot of backlash because of it. People involved in my business or people close to me were afraid that it would turn people off if I became this advocate, that it would be bad for business. But I didn't care. I just knew that it was something that I had to do. And it wouldn't be worth it to me to continue my work if it wasn't focused on the most important issue to me that there is.
Yeah, and it's like in situations like that where you feel deep inside you, like, you know what, you said you told your ex that like I feel like I need to do this. I found my calling. If you're feeling that deep inside you, like you need to do something about it.
Hmm.
Kind of like the same thing that happened with me in the podcast. I was like, you know what, I really feel like I could build a platform for people to come on and hopefully share their stories.
Yeah.
And I've got on, told my story, and I would at first I was like a little bit nervous of what people were thinking and feeling, but now it's like I don't even care if I say something, about somebody that's in my life and I offend them. It's not me trying to offend them. It's just me getting stuff out there. Like I'm really glad that you're putting yourself out there and that people are responding in like a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't, it doesn't take millions of people responding for it to
Well,
kind of touch you. You know what I mean? You get that one message and it's just like it sends you over the moon because you know that you did something.
that's totally for sure. And it's like, I haven't received like much feedback on this, but it's like those one or two that I get here and there. It's like I think to myself, this is the reason why I keep going.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, you've been through, a lot of different things. What are some small like daily practices that keep you grounded?
So my mornings are always the same. I get up and I pray first. And when I pray, I use prayer time just to give thanks for the things in my life. I don't really ask for anything. I give thanks for what I have, and I give thanks for things that I envision myself having in the future, good health and good family and all those things. Then I'll meditate for 20 minutes every day. And that really started because, I have ADHD as well. And it was a challenge for me to sit just for 5 minutes. So I built it up gradually, a couple minutes here, and then 5 minutes and 10 minutes. And now 20 minutes is my regular meditation time every day. After that, I'll read a book for 20 minutes to 30 minutes, and then I'll do a language lesson for 5 minutes. And that's all just designed to kind of get my head in the right space for the day so that I'm open to learning right away. And I've calmed my body down. The meditation is really, I kind of consider my body kind of like a dog in a lot of ways that I have to train and that I've had to to train to sit when I ask him to sit, and not be, overly anxious all the time and not have to move constantly. So, that 20 minutes in the morning I know is the time that I'll be able to sit in silence and not move a muscle. And it's really, um, it definitely comes in handy during the day when I can put myself in that state of mind again. But, but I wish I had that control I have during meditation. I wish I had more of it during the day because I do still get fidgety and anxious and, you know, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, meditation is something that I need to get more like. I've done it before, and I've done breath work and that type of stuff. I just need to put it more into my daily practice because I don't do it enough. It's, but it's, and I feel like a lot of what you just explained is like, you're doing a routine and you're working on rewiring your brain to like do better throughout the day. And I honestly think that's when it comes to mental health, that's what you have to do
Mm,
a lot is like rewire your brain to so you can do certain things or behave a certain way. It's like, but it's a constant thing. Like it's a constant struggle to be able to do that.
yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work. It's a daily practice. You don't really get any time off, you know, not if you want to make
Hmm.
sure that you keep yourself together.
Yes, for sure. I just have a few more questions here for you. If you could go back and speak to your younger self, what would you say?
I would say you're safe. I would say that you don't have to be afraid. There's a difference between being diligent and being aware and being afraid, and that you're not you're not in that scary place anymore. You've gotten out of that, and you're okay now, and you can trust people. Yeah.
Love it. And what's next for you personally, professionally, and in your advocacy work?
I'm going to continue to work with my private martial arts clients. I don't teach group classes anymore. I only work with individuals, and it gives me the chance to kind of delve deeper into their personalities and understand why they are training and what they hope to get out of it. So I want to do more of that. I want to do more workshops, which I do corporate workshops where I teach a course called The Art of Empowerment, where it's a combination of martial arts and mindfulness and understanding your own trauma and the trauma of the people that you're dealing with so that we can have better interactions in general. So I want to do more of those workshops and more speaking to different groups about mental health and about bipolar disorder and about being a non-judgmental ear for the people in their lives that need it because I think judgment is really what holds people back from sharing. And if they could feel like they could express themselves without being labeled by the person they're talking to, they're much more likely to express their reality and much more likely to open up if they do need help and they are struggling um and we have to take suicidal ideation seriously, you know. Um I had a friend months ago, I was feeling incredibly depressed and suicidal, and I opened up to him about it, and he got kind of upset, and he he told me, "Look, if you're not going to do it right, so stop talking about it." And he told me that I wasn't. He said, "You're not special, so stop talking about it. You're not you're not going to do it." It wasn't exactly what I needed to hear at the time,
Yeah.
but it showed me, okay, I love him, but I can't talk to him about this because it's not going to be beneficial to me. So we have to pick and choose the people in our lives that we can share this stuff with, for sure.
Yes, for sure. 'Cause it's like there's a lot of people I can think of that would handle me talking about it to them like in the same way that your friend did.
Mhm.
But I actually have a friend that like, we've been close on and off throughout the years. Like I've always like kept in touch with him. And I remember a couple years ago he opened up to me about he had a suicide attempt where he actually went through with it and almost died. And he spent some time in a psych ward. And I was like, dude, like, I can't believe I didn't know this. And I felt crushed that like I didn't know. And it's almost like a guilt, like, what could have I done? How could have I been there better for this person? Um, and now like I talk to him all the time, and he's my go-to person. Like last year I had a really dark spot where I was dealing with some suicide ideation stuff and thinking about stuff again. And I text him right away because he's the first person. I was like, I know he'll understand what I'm going through. And I know that like maybe he won't have the right things to say, the right words, but he'll at least understand and push me in a direction that I need to get help. And so it's like whenever I'm feeling down, or if he's not like, I know this guy pretty well. So it's like, if he's not texting back, I know that he's having struggles. So I'm
Mm.
going to bug the crap out of him until he responds.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's like, we need people like that to in our corner to
Mhm.
understand us and are there for us.
Yeah, yeah, and even just checking in every once in a while, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, is so critical. Yeah. I lost a friend a couple of years ago, and I always wonder if he would have called me, would it have made a difference, or if I would have made a call to him and spoken to him right before, you know, because for me, it's so often it's just been one person's, kind word that has kind of helped me go on another day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like sometimes those kind words come at the exact moment that you need to hear them.
Mhm.
It's like like I remember this wasn't too long ago. It was just a small compliment I got from somebody. I was like, "You have no idea how much I needed that right now."
Yeah,
Words can go a long ways.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think we do that enough for each other. You know.
Yeah, I totally agree. And uh, kind of last couple follow up questions here, or not even questions, but so let me put it this one first. Where can people find you?
So I'm on Instagram as Internal Jiu-Jitsu. My website is internaljujitsu.com. The name of my newest book is Internal Jiu-Jitsu as well. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, books.org, or at your local bookstore. Broke Down Sensei's on Amazon as well. Facebook, Internal Jiu-Jitsu. Pretty much everywhere I'm Internal Jiu-Jitsu. Yeah, and on YouTube as well.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that I add links to all those. And last thing here, we've discussed a lot of topics, covered a lot of ground tonight. Is there anything that you can think of that we did not discuss that you'd like to bring up?
I think recognizing anxiety and depression in young kids, I think is really important. I think we're kind of quick to label kids nowadays with certain disorders like ADHD but I think the depressed child is still kind of looked at as the black sheep or just someone that can't, get along in public or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, but they're not people aren't really delving into why that depression is there. And it's always, kids have layers to them. It's not just simply a bad attitude. And if we can address those things earlier on, we're going to make for better, more well-adjusted adults. And that's, to me, that's
Yeah.
critical.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And I feel like it's almost become a problem, like in today's society and how we raise kids and just all the different things that we have around kids now. It's like, I just can't believe the technology that is introduced to our kids at such a young age. And it's like, and it's like I didn't have some of this stimulation that my kids have now. And it's like, and I can see how some of it's causing problems and I can see things creeping in. It's like, okay, well, got to nip this right now before anything gets any worse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's overwhelming the amount of technology that they have and the access they have. I mean, I don't know how I would have dealt with it as a kid.
Yeah. But also my kids now, like, they have no patience. That's one thing I'm trying to teach them.
Yeah. Well, every answer is at your fingertips in a second, so it's hard to have patience.
Yeah. Very true. Awesome. Julio, well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I admire what you're doing and admire you getting out there and sharing your story. And I wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you, Travis. Same to you, man.
And thank you to all those that listened. If you resonated with this episode, please share it and leave us a review and subscribe. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.